Today I'm going to give you a complete inside look of what it was like to record, mix, and produce for the Grammy-winning musician Taylor Eigsti. Taylor is one of the best musicians and piano players on the planet. I'm really fortunate to have worked on the entirety of his past two albums, Tree Falls, which came out in 2021, and Plot Armor, which came out in 2024. I'll give you a sneak peek into the recording sessions in the studio, as well as show you the entire mix for the song Bucket of F's off of Plot Armor. I'll show you how we recorded all the instruments, and I'll walk you through how I approached mixing such a beast of a song. My name is Josh Giunta. I'm a Grammy-winning producer and mixing engineer here for the Love Science Music YouTube channel, where I show you all the ins and outs of making music in the studio. So I've worked on a lot of songs and a lot of albums in my career, but Taylor's albums were some of the most challenging records I've ever made. It was a super cool project to be a part of because it was all entirely acoustic instruments. Major hats off to Taylor for having the vision for such a large-scale project with so many musicians involved and so many moving parts. For the entire Plot Armor album, we probably had something like 40 plus recording sessions in the studio. And I'd say about half of those sessions had at least 4, 5, 6 musicians playing at once. So let me break down the recording process a little bit for the song Bucket of F's. We recorded the song over the span of a few months. We had 3 or 4 like big recording sessions and then a bunch of smaller overdub sessions. Half of the album was recorded in New York and the other half of the album was recorded in LA. In New York, we recorded here at GSI Studios, which is now called Second Take Sound. In LA, we recorded at the legendary East West Studios. For Bucket of F's, we recorded between January and May of 2023. The first thing we recorded for the song Bucket of F's was the rhythm section: bass, drums, piano, guitar. We did the rhythm section recording at East West Studios, studio number 2. After we got the rhythm section in LA, we came back to New York, and through February, March, and April, we did a lot of overdubs here at GSI Studios. Here we recorded viola, flute, many piano layers, Rhodes, and we did a lot of comping and editing of everything we'd recorded so far. Then in May 2023, we went back to LA, to East West Studios, and we did a 2-day session where we recorded all the string ensemble parts for the entire album. The string parts were written by the incredible producer and composer Andrew Ballo, who works at Universal and Capitol Records in LA. In addition to the string compositions, Andrew's also an amazing mastering engineer, and he mastered both Tree Falls album and Plot Armor. The string sessions all happened in Studio 1, which is the big main room at East West. And while we were there for the weekend, we also recorded some extra piano solos for the album in Studio 3. Studio 3 at East West is amazing because they actually have Frank Sinatra's original Steinway piano that used to be in his living room at his house in LA. Taylor just fell in love with the sound of this piano. We recorded that piano on multiple songs throughout the album. So when all was said and done for the song Bucket of F's, we probably did 7 to 10 recording sessions, about 1 to 2 days of editing and comping. The song took me about 2 whole days to mix, and we did 5 mix revisions. So we really took our time with this album and worked on it until both Taylor and I felt that it had reached its full potential for the vision we had for it. Okay, so now we're gonna look under the hood. I'm gonna show you the entire finished mix session in Pro Tools. Let's do a quick overview tour of this Pro Tools session before we dive in and start listening. All right, so up top here, these 2 blue tracks are the master bus of the session. Then we have many, many string layers. So each one of these big blocks is like 1 string part recorded with many different mics. It's a 3-string section. It's viola, violin, and cello. So here's 1 layer, 2 layers, 3 layers, 4, 5 3-string parts. Then we have a violin recording, 1, 2 violins. Then we have 2 more full string section parts. And then we get into woodwinds. We have 4 flute layers. Then we have 3 soprano sax harmonies. Then 3 other soprano sax more rhythmic parts. Then we get into tenor sax. We have a mixture of the dry tenor recordings and also tenor with effects. Then we have the sax solo and the effects. And then we get into the grand piano layers. So I think there's 5 grand piano layers on this track. Here's 1. This was recorded in LA. 2 recorded in New York. 3 recorded in LA. 4 recorded in LA. 5 recorded back in New York. Keys part, 4 keys parts. We have the viola part, that's Benny von Gutzeit. Guitar part, that's Charles Altura here in brown. Bass part, these are DJ Ginyard. And then in green is the drum kit part, that's Oscar Seaton Jr. In total, there's 127 tracks, which includes all the instrument and mic recordings, plus all the groups and effects buses that I used in the mix process. Then at the bottom of the session here, all these grayed out tracks are musical parts we decided not to use, and also microphone recordings that I recorded in the recording sessions but actually didn't use for the mix. I wanted to limit the amount of mics I used as much as I could to simplify an already really complicated mix process. All right, so let's check out some of these instrument sounds. So usually if I'm mixing an instrumental record, I like to build from the rhythm section up. So I'll start mixing the drums first, then go to the bass, then go to the primary choral instrument, which in this case is piano, then add in the other choral instruments, guitar and keys. Then I added the woodwinds, and then I saved the strings for last. So I organized my basic rhythm section sound first, and then I went and dealt with all the string parts and put it all together. The drum kit was recorded in the booth at Studio 2 at East West, and it sounds like this. I mic'd the kit with a matched pair of stereo condenser mics. I did a mono mic in the middle of the kit, 2 kick mics, 2 snare mics, and mic'd all the toms. For bass, I recorded a clean DI signal and also an effects DI signal, which DJ determined his own effects with his effects board. We recorded guitar with a Fender Twin amp. I used a Royer ribbon mic and also a SM57, and I blended the two. Viola we recorded here in the vocal booth with a condenser and a ribbon mic. For piano, I usually like to do a pair of close condenser mics and also a pair of close ribbon mics and blend the two. I often like to put a mic under the piano and pan it mono, and sometimes I like to put a mic at the very end of the piano, pointed towards the low end strings, also pan mono. I wasn't able to use the same mics in LA, and in New York I had to use different mics, but I still stuck to the condenser and ribbon combo. I was fine with getting slightly different piano sounds. I felt like that would just help the timbre of the record and help things be mixed and find their own space. For woodwinds, I almost always record a condenser mic and a ribbon mic. I usually ask the musician which they prefer. Most musicians have a preference if they want a really bright and detailed sound or a more darker tone. So I usually follow the musician's lead for what their sound preference is. Also, I like to have the ribbon mic option and the condenser mic option for the mix, because I never know during the recording session which sound I'll end up needing in the mix, if I want something really full and detailed or something more dark and subtle. We have 4 stacked up flute harmonies here. I recorded all the flutes with a condenser mic. For this song, there were only 3 string players for the entirety of the song. There are up to 8 different written parts of harmony at any given time. So we basically close mic'd each instrument. Then I used 3 pairs of room mics at different distances from the string players. This way I could get a really balanced close sound, or slightly far away sound, or a very far away sound. When recording in a really big room, you might as well put up more mics and capture the room sound and use it in the mix, because it's not every day you get to record in a big space, so you might as well utilize it. If you really want to see all the mics and preamps and gear that I used on these recording sessions, I'll put a link below to the input sheet that I created before the recordings. All right, so now let's put all these musical parts together. I'm gonna play the song and bring in one instrument at a time so you can see how the musical layers lock together, and sonically they have their own space in the mix. The way I approach mixing a song that has this many layers is to treat each layer in isolation first before trying to put it all together. So about 60 or 70% of my mix process is going through every mic one by one, soloed, and processing it in a way that I see fit. So first I'll polish up each layer and fine tune it. And then once I have my individual instrument sounds, I'll start listening to groups of instruments together as the song progresses and find space for every instrument. The last 20 or 30% of my time on a mix is spent listening to big chunks of the song with many groups of instruments. And that's when I really fine tune my panning and my levels and my EQ placement in the macro sense of a song. The last 10% of my mix time is spent doing things to the master bus, which processes all of the instruments together. It's almost like a light mastering job to finish off the mix and add some final polish. You can see here in this session, all these squiggly lines are volume automation. Basically, the more parts you have, the more automation you need to highlight things and then move them back into the backdrop as the song is progressing in real time. The string parts here have really specific automation that changes and flows throughout the entire song. Taylor's ideas for how dynamic the string parts should be, it was so specific. I actually just showed him how to automate in Pro Tools, and he drew in all this volume automation on the strings himself to get it exactly how we wanted it. And Taylor and I really went through all the auxiliary parts in this production and determined where certain parts would shine, where certain melodies would pop out, and where they would recede into the background. Every instrument in the entire session has automation through a lot of the song. So we crafted our own dynamics through automation, almost like a conductor would be conducting the entire ensemble. You'll also see there's a lot of lines here in the audio, and those are all edits. So we spent a lot of time editing between the different takes the musicians made, really making sure that all the parts were complementary musically to the other parts happening in the song, which took a good amount of editing. I want to talk about my routing for this mix and all the mixes I do here. I do a hybrid of digital mixing with plugins in the software in Pro Tools, and I also pass the audio into the console here, this API 1608 console, where I'm using analog summing and analog EQ, and then the console is passing to outboard bus compression, and that prints back to Pro Tools. The heavy lifting of my mix work happens in Pro Tools with a big variety of plugins. As you can see, I have a lot of plugins open here. I have multiple plugins on pretty much every track in the whole session. And then if you check out my outputs here in Pro Tools, you'll notice that I'm using analog outs, which are going from Pro Tools to the API console we have here in the studio. The outputs of Pro Tools are going to the line inputs of the console, and the console does the summing. So you can see here, I have it all labeled on the board. There's 2 stereo tracks of strings, a pair for keys, 3 stereo tracks for different piano mics. There's 2 tracks for bass, the bass DIs. There's 2 tracks for the guitar parts, 2 tracks for viola, drum overheads, mono drum mic, 2 kick mics, snare mics, a pair of channels for flutes, a pair of channels for sax. I'm also using outboard reverb. You can see I have a lot of the sends here activated. Those yellow lights are sending audio from those different channels to the Bricasti reverb. So I'm sending a touch of reverb to pretty much every instrument in the mix except for bass. I'm also using outboard EQ. I'm EQing all of these groups, or most of these groups, with the API 560s and 550 EQs here built into the console. Once the console sums my entire mix down to a stereo left and right track, that final mix is patched over to a bus compressor, the dangerous compressor. It's set to compress super lightly at 1.4 to 1. I'm sending a bunch of gain out of the compressor, which gets me nice tone on the mix. And then that is patched back to Pro Tools, where I print my final mix. As the mix prints, it passes through one more plugin chain, which is basically my master fader for some additional last processing. Anytime I work on music for a really long period of time, I usually prefer to send the mixes of mine to a mastering engineer. It's great to have a person with fresh ears hear the music for the first time and assess my mixes and take them to the next level. Comment below with any questions you have about this song or about this album or about recording in general. If you've enjoyed this, please subscribe and help me keep building the channel. Thank you for watching, and more coming soon.